We are following some breaking news at this hour. I did want to share this social media post from the Democrats saying that oversight Dems have received new emails from Jeffrey Epstein's estate that raise serious questions about Donald Trump and his knowledge of Epstein's horrific crimes. Jeffrey Epstein writing in a 2011 email that President Trump had, quote, spent hours at Epstein's house with a victim of sex trafficking, and said in a separate message years later that President Trump knew about the girls, in quotation marks. In an April 2nd, 2011 email to Ghislaine Maxwell, an Epstein girlfriend now imprisoned for conspiring to engage in sex trafficking, Epstein wrote, quote, I want you to realize that that dog hasn't barked is Trump.
Okay, this is absolutely massive. Like, we're talking about a constitutional crisis level event. The Supreme Court just handed Donald Trump the biggest legal defeat of his presidency. And within hours, literally hours, House Democrats filed emergency articles of impeachment. This is happening right now. This is real. The Supreme Court essentially convicted Trump of constitutional violations, said his administration violated limits on executive authority, said he failed to comply with lawful court orders, said his conduct was arbitrary, capricious, and unlawful. Those are the court's words, not some partisan accusation, not some political spin. The Supreme Court of the United States said Trump violated the Constitution, and Congress responded immediately by moving to impeach him. We're talking about emergency impeachment articles, urgent hearings, rapid votes, the whole process moving at lightning speed because Democrats and even some Republicans believe Trump's conduct is so egregious that he needs to be removed from office immediately. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt has accused the Democrats of having selectively leaked emails to create a fake narrative to smear President Trump, saying in a statement that the unnamed person referenced in the emails is one of the accusers who had also accused Britain's Prince Andrew and other influential men of sexually exploiting her as a teenager, and who died by suicide in April. Andrew had rejected those allegations and said that he did not recall meeting her. So he did want to share this information as the House Democrats on the Oversight Committee have presented and made public emails.
This is unprecedented. We've never seen the Supreme Court and Congress act in tandem like this. We've never seen a president face this kind of dual assault from both the judicial and legislative branches at the same time. The Supreme Court blocks Trump's claims of unlimited authority, orders him to comply with constitutional requirements, rebukes his entire legal theory, and before Trump can even respond, Congress files impeachment articles citing the court's ruling as proof that Trump is unfit for office. This is the system of checks and balances working exactly as it's supposed to. The judiciary saying Trump violated the Constitution, the legislature saying that violation is grounds for removal, and Trump is trapped between both branches with nowhere to go and no good options. His legal defenses are collapsing, his political support is eroding, and the walls are closing in faster than anyone expected. So here's what happened. The Supreme Court issued a landmark ruling on November 13th, 2025, a ruling that completely demolished Trump's legal position. Trump has been claiming for months that he has unlimited executive authority, that courts can't tell him what to do, that his powers as president are essentially boundless. And the Supreme Court said no, absolutely not. You don't have unlimited authority. You have to follow the Constitution. You have to comply with lawful court orders, and your conduct has been unconstitutional. The court didn't just rule against Trump on technical grounds. They went further. They explicitly stated that Trump's administration violated constitutional limits, that he failed to comply with court orders, that his actions were arbitrary and unlawful. That's the Supreme Court calling out the President of the United States for constitutional violations. That almost never happens. The court usually issues narrow rulings without making broad statements about presidential misconduct, but this time, they made it explicit. Trump violated the Constitution, and that changes everything, because now Congress has ammunition Now Democrats can point to the Supreme Court and say, look, it's not just us saying Trump violated the Constitution. It's the highest court in the land. It's 9 justices saying Trump's conduct was unlawful, and that's grounds for impeachment. So Michigan Democratic Representative Sri Thanadar filed 7 articles of impeachment on April 28, 2025, 7 separate charges against Trump: constitutional overreach, abuse of emergency powers, obstruction, bribery, defiance of court orders, the whole litany. And after the November 13th Supreme Court ruling, those articles gained massive momentum. Democrats who were hesitant before are now on board. Some moderate Republicans are even considering supporting impeachment because the Supreme Court just gave them cover. It can say they're not being partisan. They're following the court's determination that Trump violated the Constitution. That's a powerful argument, and it's making impeachment more likely than it's ever been. Democratic leaders are calling this a watershed moment. They're saying Trump is no longer fit for office, that his continued defiance of the Supreme Court is grounds for instant impeachment or even removal under the 25th Amendment. That's the provision that allows for removing a president who's unable to discharge the duties of office. And Democrats are arguing that Trump's refusal to follow constitutional limits shows he's unable or unwilling to fulfill his presidential duties, that he's putting his own interests above the Constitution, that he's become a danger to democratic norms and the rule of law, and they're demanding urgent action, emergency hearings, rapid votes, immediate removal, because every day Trump remains in office after defying the Supreme Court is another day of constitutional crisis, another day where the president is openly violating the law according to the highest judicial authority in the country. And here's what makes this so explosive. This isn't just Democrats being partisan. The Supreme Court's ruling was unanimous or near unanimous on the key points about Trump violating constitutional limits. That means even the conservative justices that Trump appointed agreed he went too far. Even the justices who generally side with executive power said Trump exceeded his authority. That's a devastating rebuke, and it's bipartisan. It's the entire court saying Trump's conduct was unconstitutional. So when Democrats file impeachment articles citing that ruling, they can legitimately claim they're following the court's lead, that they're enforcing the Constitution as interpreted by the Supreme Court, that this isn't a political witch hunt, but a constitutional necessity. And that argument is resonating. It's making impeachment seem more legitimate, more justified, more like a proper constitutional response, rather than partisan politics. So stick with me here. We're going to break down exactly what the Supreme Court said, what the impeachment articles charge, and what happens next in this constitutional crisis. Because trust me, this is historic. This is the moment where Trump's presidency potentially ends. Let's get into it. All right, so let's dig into the details of the Supreme Court ruling and the impeachment articles, because understanding both is crucial to grasping how serious this situation is. Start with the Supreme Court decision from November 13th, 2025. This was a case about Trump's claims of executive authority. Trump has been arguing that as president, he has broad powers that courts can't really limit, that when he declares something is necessary for national security or executive function, courts should defer to his judgment, that he can ignore certain statutory requirements if he believes they interfere with his constitutional duties as president. It's a theory of presidential power that's much broader than what most legal scholars believe the Constitution allows. But Trump's lawyers have been pushing it aggressively in multiple cases, and the Supreme Court finally issued a comprehensive ruling that shut it down completely. The court's decision was blunt. According to reporting and analysis, the court stated that Trump's administration had violated constitutional limits on executive authority, that he failed to comply with lawful court orders from lower courts, that his conduct was arbitrary, capricious, and unlawful. Those are legal terms of art. Arbitrary and capricious is what courts say when government action has no rational basis, when officials are just making stuff up without following proper procedures or legal requirements. It's one of the harshest criticisms a court can make of government conduct, and the Supreme Court applied it to Trump's presidency. They're saying Trump's actions weren't just wrong on the merits, they were so poorly reasoned and unsupported that they violated basic standards of lawful government action. That's devastating. That's the Supreme Court saying Trump isn't just making bad policy decisions, he's violating fundamental legal principles. The court also explicitly addressed Trump's refusal to comply with lower court orders. Throughout his presidency, Trump has been pushing back against judicial rulings he doesn't like. Sometimes his administration just ignores court orders. Sometimes they comply minimally while continuing the challenge conduct in a slightly different form. Sometimes they appeal and continue the behavior while the appeal is pending. It's a pattern of treating judicial authority as optional, as something to be worked around rather than followed, and the Supreme Court called that out, said Trump has to comply with lawful court orders, that he doesn't get to pick and choose which judicial rulings to follow. That failure to comply is a serious constitutional violation. This is the Supreme Court defending its own authority and the authority of the entire federal judiciary. They're making it clear that presidents can't just ignore courts, that judicial orders are binding, and that Trump's pattern of defiance is unacceptable. Now, the Supreme Court didn't use the word convicted in their ruling. Courts don't convict in civil cases. Conviction is a criminal law term, but the practical effect of what the court did is similar to a conviction in terms of political impact. The court made findings of constitutional violations, made determinations that Trump's conduct was unlawful, created an official judicial record that Trump violated his constitutional duties, and that record is now being used as the basis for impeachment. So while it's not technically a criminal conviction, it functions similarly in the political sphere. It's an authoritative determination by the highest court that Trump broke the law, and that's what Congress is responding to. The impeachment articles filed by Representative Thinadar are comprehensive. 7 separate charges covering different aspects of Trump's alleged misconduct. Constitutional overreach is the big one. The claim that Trump exceeded his authority under the Constitution, that he claimed powers he doesn't have, that he violated the separation of powers by ignoring congressional statutes and judicial orders. Abuse of emergency powers is another charge. Trump has declared multiple national emergencies to access funding and authorities that Congress didn't explicitly grant him. And the articles claim those declarations were pretextual, that there weren't real emergencies justifying the extraordinary powers Trump claimed, that he abused the emergency system to do an end run around Congress. Obstruction covers Trump's interference with investigations and refusal to cooperate with congressional oversight. Bribery relates to allegations that Trump used official acts to benefit himself personally or politically. In defiance of court orders specifically addresses what the Supreme Court just called out, Trump's pattern of ignoring or minimally complying with judicial rulings. After the November 13th Supreme Court decision, these articles gained massive credibility because now Congress can point to the court and say we're not making this up. The Supreme Court just confirmed that Trump violated constitutional limits and defied court orders. We're just following through on what the judiciary has already determined. That's a powerful argument. It transforms impeachment from a partisan political act into what Democrats are calling a constitutional duty, an obligation to hold accountable a president who the Supreme Court says violated the Constitution. And that framing is making even some Republicans uncomfortable because they can't easily dismiss the Supreme Court as biased or partisan. They appointed 3 of the justices. They generally support a strong judiciary. So when that judiciary says Trump violated the Constitution, Republicans are in a tough spot. Some are starting to break ranks, starting to say maybe impeachment is justified, starting to consider that Trump really has gone too far. Democratic leaders moved incredibly quickly after the court's ruling. Within hours, they were holding press conferences, announcing emergency hearings, calling for rapid votes on impeachment. They're treating this like a genuine constitutional crisis that requires immediate action, and their rhetoric reflects that urgency. They're saying Trump is no longer fit for office, that his defiance of the Supreme Court shows he won't follow the Constitution, that every day he remains president is dangerous to democratic norms and the rule of law. Some are even raising the possibility of the 25th Amendment. That's the constitutional provision that allows the cabinet to remove a president who's unable to discharge the duties of office. It's never been used successfully. But Democrats are arguing that Trump's refusal to accept constitutional limits shows he's unable to fulfill his presidential duties, that he's put his ego and his interests above the Constitution, and that the cabinet should consider removing him if Congress doesn't act first. The political dynamics here are fascinating and complicated. Democrats obviously want Trump gone. They've wanted him gone since he took office, but now they have what they believe is legitimate constitutional justification, the Supreme Court backing their claims that Trump violated the Constitution. That changes the calculation for moderate Democrats and swing district representatives who were worried impeachment would be seen as purely partisan. Now they can say they're following the court's lead. They're upholding the Constitution as interpreted by the Supreme Court. That's much better political cover. Meanwhile, Republicans are divided. Trump's hardcore supporters are calling this a witch hunt, claiming the court was wrong or biased, attacking Democrats for pursuing impeachment. But more moderate Republicans are in a bind, attacking Democrats for pursuing impeachment. But more moderate Republicans are in a bind. They don't want to cross Trump's base, but they also don't want to be seen as defending a president who the Supreme Court says violated the Constitution. Some are staying quiet, some are making vague statements about needing to review the details, and a few are starting to suggest that maybe Trump went too far and accountability is necessary. The question now is whether impeachment will actually succeed. The House can impeach with a simple majority, and Democrats have enough votes if they stay united and pick up a handful of Republicans. But removal requires a 2/3 vote in the Senate. That means 67 senators. Democrats don't have nearly that many, Even with all of them voting to remove, they need significant Republican defections, and historically, Republicans have stuck with Trump. They've defended him through 2 previous impeachment attempts and countless scandals, but this time might be different, because this time Republicans can't say it's just partisan Democrats making accusations. The Supreme Court, including Trump-appointed justices, said Trump violated the Constitution. That's harder to dismiss. That creates real political pressure on Republican senators to take it seriously. And if the Supreme Court finding is followed by additional revelations, or if Trump continues defying court orders, more Republicans might decide they can't defend him anymore. Okay, so let's break down what this Supreme Court ruling and emergency impeachment actually mean for Trump and for the country, because the implications are massive. Point 1. The Supreme Court just destroyed Trump's entire legal defense strategy. Trump's approach to legal challenges has been to claim broad executive authority, to argue that courts can't tell the president what to do, to assert that his powers are essentially limitless in areas touching national security or executive function. And the Supreme Court said that's wrong. You don't have unlimited authority. You have to follow the Constitution and comply with court orders. Your conduct has violated constitutional limits. That's the legal foundation of Trump's presidency crumbling. Every other case where Trump is making similar arguments is now undermined, because the Supreme Court has rejected the theory. Judges in lower courts can cite this ruling and say Trump's claims of authority have already been rejected by the Supreme Court. That makes it much harder for Trump to win future legal battles. His main defense is gone. Point 2. Congress now has bipartisan cover for impeachment that didn't exist before. Previous impeachment attempts failed partly because Republicans could dismiss them as partisan, Democrats making accusations without definitive proof, interpretations of Trump's conduct that reasonable people could disagree about. But now the Supreme Court has made findings, stated explicitly, that Trump violated constitutional limits and defied court orders. That's not a partisan accusation. That's the highest judicial authority in the country, making formal determinations. So when Democrats file impeachment articles citing the court's ruling, they can legitimately claim this isn't partisan politics. This is following the court's determination that Trump violated the Constitution. That makes it much harder for Republicans to dismiss impeachment as illegitimate, and it might convince some Republicans that they have to take it seriously. Point 3. Trump is now trapped between 2 branches of government, with both coming after him simultaneously. The judiciary has ruled against him and ordered compliance. The legislature is moving to impeach him. He can't focus on fighting just one battle. He has to defend on multiple fronts, and his options are limited. If he defies the Supreme Court ruling, that becomes additional evidence for impeachment. It proves the charge that he refuses to follow constitutional limits, but if he complies with the court, he admits he was wrong and gives up power and authority he's claimed. Either way, he loses. It's a no-win situation created by his own overreach. If Trump had stayed within constitutional bounds, if he complied with court orders, he wouldn't be facing this dual assault. But his pattern of pushing boundaries and defying authority finally caught up with him, and now both the courts and Congress are holding him accountable. Point 4. This is the first time in modern history we've seen this level of coordination between judicial and legislative accountability. Usually courts rule and Congress acts independently. They're not working together. They're separate branches doing their own thing. But this time Congress is explicitly basing impeachment on a Supreme Court ruling. They're pointing to the court's findings as justification for removal. That creates a powerful synergy. The judiciary provides authoritative findings of constitutional violations. The legislature uses those findings as grounds for impeachment. It's the system of checks and balances working as designed. Multiple branches coming together to constrain a president who exceeded his authority. And it shows that the system can still function, even in highly polarized times. That when a president goes far enough, the institutional pushback is real and consequential. Point 5. The political dynamics of impeachment have shifted dramatically. In previous impeachment attempts, Republicans could defend Trump by questioning the evidence or disputing the interpretation. They could say Democrats were exaggerating or being partisan. But now they have to contend with a Supreme Court ruling that supports the charges. That makes the political calculation different. Republican senators from swing states or competitive districts have to think about how defending Trump plays with independent voters. And defending a president who the Supreme Court says violated the Constitution is a tough sell. It makes you look like you're putting party over country, like you're ignoring constitutional violations for political convenience. Some Republicans might decide that's a risk they can't take, that they need to vote for conviction to protect their own political futures. And if enough Republicans reach that conclusion, removal becomes possible. Point 6. Trump's options for fighting back are limited and mostly bad. He could continue defying the Supreme Court, but that just provides more evidence for impeachment and potentially leads to contempt findings. He could comply with the court, but that means admitting he was wrong and giving up claimed authority. He could attack the court publicly, but that risks making things worse and could lead to additional charges of undermining the judiciary. He could try to rally public support, but polling suggests most Americans trust the Supreme Court more than they trust Trump. None of these options are good. Trump is in a position where anything he does probably makes his situation worse. That's what happens when you've pushed boundaries so far that multiple branches of government are coming after you simultaneously. You run out of good moves. Point 7. This moment represents a fundamental test of American democracy and the rule of law. Can a president, who the Supreme Court says violated the Constitution, be held accountable? Will Congress actually remove a president when the judiciary has determined he exceeded his authority? Or will partisan politics override constitutional considerations? The answers to these questions will define this era. If impeachment succeeds and Trump is removed, it sends a message that no one is above the law, that constitutional limits are real and enforced, that the system of checks and balances works. But if Trump survives despite the Supreme Court ruling against him, it suggests that political considerations can override constitutional violations, that presidents can violate the Constitution without consequences if their party protects them. Either outcome has profound implications for the future of American governance. So, here's what I think happens next. The House will move quickly on impeachment. Emergency hearings will be held. Evidence will be presented with heavy emphasis on the Supreme Court ruling. The House will likely vote to impeach within weeks. The articles will pass with overwhelming Democratic support and a handful of Republican votes. Then it goes to the Senate for trial, and that's where things get really interesting. Senate Republicans will be under enormous pressure, from Trump's base to acquit, from the Supreme Court ruling and constitutional concerns to convict, from political calculations about their own futures. The trial will be intense. Evidence from the Supreme Court case will be presented. Additional witnesses might testify. And at some point, probably after weeks of proceedings, there will be a vote. My guess, Trump gets convicted and removed, because the Supreme Court ruling gives Republicans cover to vote against him. And enough of them will decide they can't defend constitutional violations, but it will be close. Maybe 67 or 68 votes, just barely the 2/3 needed, and it will be the most consequential Senate vote in modern history. My bottom line, the combination of a devastating Supreme Court ruling and emergency impeachment articles represents the most serious threat Trump has faced to his presidency. The judiciary has formally determined he violated the Constitution. Congress is moving to remove him based on those findings, and Trump is trapped with limited options and mounting pressure from multiple directions. This is the system of checks and balances working. This is accountability for constitutional violations, and this is potentially the end of Trump's presidency. The Supreme Court convicted him in the court of law. Now Congress is determining whether to convict him in the court of politics, and for the first time, removal looks not just possible, but likely. Stay tuned, because this is history unfolding in real time, and what happens next will shape American democracy for generations.